So then we are back with more understanding from the time of the Second Tabernacle Services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. Then Peter Yeshayahu the prophet, we find a layer of understanding related with the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries, and also the transitional time of the politics and then the economies back on the proper agenda. So then previously there was then an information coming from the Pacific, the European Union already sensing then the end. They are already protecting themselves and the investors and the people from bank crashes. So they know it's coming. Second section of it lines up also with instructions. We find that in Moscow times, then the entrance of the first ETF on the Moscow exchange signals an important step of the development of financial infrastructure of the Northern Kingdom. So these came out also a very huge investment, and then shows very plainly then we are on the schedule as far as we can understand. Then the European Union breaking, and then the Northern Kingdom taking steps of then providing more areas of infrastructure of their own, then indicating not only being leaders of the BRICS, but also investing themselves in this new financial system. So it's very interesting because thus far, as per the instructions, we find then the flow of these events very concise and very solid from the time of Daniel, and also we find during this time where we can understand this period of being the time of China. What can we expect next? Since was already explained the plan was then making sure those kingdoms they relate with themselves and then forming the initiation of the system yet coming. Then we find China, we find they already have their own banking. The kingdom of the north and south, they are banking already as a group. Then we find obviously there's huge investment, and then not only this, but then very shortly, since the US then is encroaching around the world, trying then in quote to preach the old same junk, at some point China is going to get fed up with it, and then we can expect the services of the Northern Kingdom as their managers. So let's watch it very closely, because then when we read Daniel the 11th chapter, we find then the Soviet Union once again becoming more than the previous condition. So let's understand these and become very familiar with it, because thus far is every situation is in line and the expectation is very solid, because it is truly confirmed as we can understand per the regions of the planet. As far as parcels and freighting, we can expect then the South Island of the New Zealand becoming then obviously the trading post of the South Pacific, because they are yet clean from Western influences. Unfortunately, Australia got entangled with the US, and then there are many soldiers over there in Australia, and obviously they're going to make sure then the Chinese system doesn't go very far. But the problem is not only they are going far, but they are going global-wise. So then we must be very cautious with this situation, because if we don't take the proper measures and then retrieve from the market and then rebuild ourselves, then we can find ourselves overextending And then at the top of it, of the end of these 36 months, rather than rebuilding ourselves, we find ourselves at the very end of our expenses. And not only this, but then crashing, and then having to do the whole works and not having a subsystem. So we must watch for these news, because they are indicating what the Messiah has said very solidly. We find then, obviously, the Northern Kingdom already taking the steps. We find then China taking steps. But there are a few areas of relationship with Japan and the Northern Kingdom where then there are some disputes, and those also are being resolved. But then let's make sure we understand there is yet a push for a Balian system, where then some nations are trying to cling back to the old junkies, and those won't work. What the Balians are trying to do is then try to combine the area of the 50s, for instance, with their own way of doing it. What we can understand of the new system yet coming is the inclusion of the era of the 50s with the simplicity, trustability, obviously, because when you log on in the system you have to have a positive balance. So then you can do trade as you wish. As long as your balance is positive, you can have 24 digits of earnings, but then must be positive, so then the computer does not halt. But not only this, then shows us a lack of organization in our own country. We should have last year retrieved ourselves from the world, and then we should have rebuilt ourselves. There is a reason why Israel then should fight with Gaza, because Israel must determine and realize the importance of the returning of the cities of the Messiah, and they should realize the first holy city is on the land of Sudan, northern Sudan, the land of Cush, as per the instructions of the prophet Yeshayahu. That's where we find then the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. So Israel must have skirmishes with their neighbors very strongly until they realize if they don't resume the holy services, they are going to be wiped out of the map. It is a form of dependency upon the Creator of the heavens and the earth. As long as Israel has its way and trying to get money from somebody else and playing around with their own armaments and try then having their own cisterns, providing themselves with their own water, they understand the scripture. Rather than relying upon the Creator for the rain, then they want to store water in their cisterns so they can do their own thing. At some point they must realize if they don't then complete the holy services, they're going to be threatened with being wiped out of the map. So that's the reason why the skirmishes with Gaza then has started. And it was last year explained. It must remain in order for them to realize, so they must resume the second tabernacle services. So then we understand our system is breaking, we understand the European system is also breaking. And the Chinese at some point, because of this encroachment of the Balian system, they're going to get fed up with it. You can be sure of it. So then when we read Daniel the 11th chapter, we understand the northern kingdom's condition of the second more than the first. But if you evaluate the economy of the northern kingdom, comparing with these roughly 20 years left, they won't be able to get their economy so high other than becoming the managers of China, because of the Balian system that is filtered. It's the only country, the Northern Kingdom is the very country that the United States has feared the most. It's the only country that had taken on US 101. And this very nation is returning. So then we find the Cold War of the past returning, but this time the Soviet Union must win. Not because there is a war going on as far as armament. It is then related with the principle of Daniel 11. Because US is a Balian system, Babylonian system, though we understand the monetary system is breaking, but then the US is encroaching itself around the world, trying to impose its legalities, its policies, and it's not going to work. Then we find at some point China tired of it, and then the Soviet Union of the past returning, and then the situation must then be placed on a halt. So we must back away from the world's scenario so we can rebuild. And we should have done this last year. If we would have then asked China to do patrols, we would have released ourselves from so many responsibilities. But no, we did the contrary. We overextended ourselves. Then we purchased the war from Israel and Gaza. We gave them more money, and the war is back. There it is. You find Israel doing airstrikes on Gaza. So it makes us stupid, unwise. Because a time of rebuilding, so we can give way so China can do what they should do. So then other countries later can benefit from investing in the system. So nations, they invest in the system as individuals, and individuals also, they do as individuals. But thus far it is on schedule. We find many areas of then the relationship of Baal and Dragon already taking place, and it goes so far. So the more the US pushes for the Balian system, the more China gets upset, the more we push the situation for them to hire the Northern Kingdom. Then we find our old friends, and this time they're going to get their way. So let's be watchful.